It's definitely been less than ideal to see some of these beloved game companies fall prey for greedy microtransactions and monetization that have ruined a lot of their games, frankly. But there are some out there that remain true to, empowering developers, ensuring that their creativity and design integrity is kept intact and the like. And Sony's been one such company. We have seen releases like Last of Us and God of War and Death Stranding and all of these different games they have supported that have just been, single-player, story-driven games with no bullshit attached. So Sony is one of those companies that people hope will continue doing what they do. And that's why this latest patent from Sony is something that's caused a bit of distress among certain people, especially fans of PlayStation, who are hoping that this patent just stays a patent. Just the fact that this patent exists, at the very least, tells me that Sony is dabbling and thinking in this direction, even if they might not necessarily implement this stuff, which is the hope. So here we go. This is an article from news outlet All Gamers, and the headline reads, Sony files patent for Guide AI that sells microtransactions if you're stuck. A patent filed by Sony describes a sort of voice assistant to help you beat bosses with hints and microtransactions. And then the body of the article reads, a brief overview of the in-game resource surfacing platform outlines a language processing system that identifies an objective in the game you're stuck with and finds relevant solutions, including if there is DLC or other items available in the game store. Drawings that accompany the patent show on-screen prompts giving you advice about which move to use in 2018's God of War to beat a boss. Now, I will be going through these patent images later in the video. For now, though, let's get all the basic information out of the way. Those hints are not necessarily confined to helpful advice, as the process can also identify certain resources the player may be lacking in order to continue, which may also be available through purchasing microtransactions or an in-game store. So basically, we're looking at a patent where if it feels like the player is not progressing or if they're stuck with a boss battle, the game might suggest, hey, just buy this item and you might be able to overcome this situation, rather than having players just overcome the challenge through trial and error. And then to close things off, the article concludes with a quote from the patent itself that reads, often there may be an in-game resource of the game environment that could aid the user in accomplishing the objective with the character. The in-game resource may be downloadable content, add-ons, upgrades, items, tips, strategy, communal data, etc. However, the user is not necessarily aware that such a resource exists. Well, the whole point of a video game is that you may not necessarily find everything, but different players, based on how they play and what routes they take, the kinds of explorations that they do, may have a different experience and may find different items and different ways to tackle a certain boss based on their own playthrough, and that's fine. I don't agree with this idea of a notification popping up in the middle of a game playthrough that talks about, here's what you need. Oh, by the way, buy this. You can buy this in the store. Unless, of course, the player turns on these tips, kind of like if they do an easy mode, then sure, maybe the game can drop hints, but not to the point where they're selling the solution, because that just seems pretty manipulative. Further highlighting the nature of this technology, algorithm, whatever you want to call it, is the patent website, which provides heaps of details here, but I don't want to go through all of this. Instead, what I'm going to do is just read this bit. And it states, many video games have hundreds to thousands of individual items for users to earn, find, or purchase and use within the video game. Some of these include tools, armor, skins, vehicles, consumables, etc. There are also hundreds to thousands of individual game titles available to players on many popular platforms such as PlayStation, personal computers, and mobile devices. This results in a selection of items that is far more vast for players of present than that for players of just a few product cycles ago. While both the range of in-game items as well as the number of game titles has steadily increased over the years, the methodology players use to find suitable or effective items for making progress within a game has not kept pace. For example, a player generally must rely on a combination of trial and error, guesswork, and research, such as by asking a friend when deciding on which item, add-on, or upgrade to obtain in order to achieve a goal. They say that like this is a bad thing, but part of what makes overcoming a challenge so fulfilling is that process of trial and error, the occasional guesswork, and the occasional research if it comes to that. Even then, the player may have to experiment with a number of items, add-ons, and or upgrades. Again, all part of the process of gaming and all part of what makes a game fun, before arriving at one that is most effective for their particular objective, character, style of play, etc. Thus, there's currently a disconnect between players and the resources available to them within a game, and more particularly, those resources most suitable for the individual player circumstances, character, and play style. I mean, it's up to game developers to design the game in such a way that things like items and resources available are presented well enough that players understand what is at their disposal and which ways they can experiment in terms of play style. When players become frustrated with their repeated failures to accomplish some objective, there's a higher likelihood that the player will quit the game and not experience the totality of what the game is intended to offer. There is thus a need and a benefit to develop and integrate an in-game platform to match players with those resources that are most likely to help them succeed in view of the player's play style and behavior, both within the game in question as well as across a plurality of additional games the players participates in. There is moreover a need and benefit for game publishers and virtual store platforms to be able to identify specific in-game resources that would complement the player in their gameplay and communicate the same to them. This all just sounds so like players aren't smart enough to figure out a game, so we should hold their hands and sort of guide them towards the microtransaction store, so that when they're frustrated, they do this impulse buying where they purchase a resource because they're frustrated. Again, very manipulative, sort of, it feels like it's trying to prey on emotions. I'm all for a system that offers tutorials and tips and in a super easy mode offer ways to just obtain a resource on the spot if a player is just not able to overcome something. But again, to tie that into a monetization model, that's when it becomes less about trying to help out players who are less proficient in video games, and it becomes more about taking advantage of them. In addition to that wall of text, this website also presents various images that kind of detail the patent and how it all works. Let's start with this image right here. On the left, you can see that the patent details a situation in which a player might use voice assistant to say something like, "Hey PlayStation, how do I defeat the boss?" And then the PlayStation operating system may respond with something like, "80% of players like you defeated the boss using resource X." Things get insidious when you look at this bit right here that suggests, "Here's resource X, buy it now." Again, just sort of manipulating people into doing impulse spending. The next image provides a more specific example that utilizes God of War as an example, and to me this is pretty gross feeling given that God of War is the prime example of a game that isn't marred by monetization. This is a game that maintained its integrity from beginning to end. So to use a game like that was so passionately developed by the folks at Santa Monica as an example for a scheme that is so opposite to what God of War represents, kind of grosses me out a bit. And I don't believe that this is representative of what Santa Monica specifically has planned for God of War 2. I really doubt that they're out of the blue gonna go the microtransactions route with that franchise. Keep in mind that God of War is a Sony franchise, so they can, take an image like this and use it however they want for a patent if they so desire. So this isn't something that Santa Monica was necessarily directly involved in, and hopefully this isn't actually something that Sony's planning for the next God of War, because that would suck. So it reads right here, players who used Resource E were successful on their first attempt 80% of the time and defeated Boss X in about 1 minute on average. Select Resource E now. So this is a potential pop-up notification. The example provided is that you might face a boss, and depending on how many players used a certain resource to defeat that boss and how successful they were, that item might be recommended, and you may immediately be able to go to the storefront and just make that purchase. And then beyond that, we have another pop-up notification example that reads, choose Resource E. Based on our simulations, you will have a 90% probability of defeating Boss X on your first attempt. And right here is an image of an item that you could buy in the store, the shield, for example, that you might not have to actually earn by playing the game. You could just kind of spend money and immediately get that item. And then here's an example of what that might look like in the store. So here's, chest armor for game one being God of War being used as an example, and then the Guardian shield that is highlighted in this notification. So, confirming this pop-up might take you to this, and then, for $1.99, you could just immediately get that and skip through, the game design and pay to win in a lot of ways, pay to gain that advantage rather than overcoming challenges through gameplay. And look at the description of these items. They don't actually describe the item itself, but rather present statistics that might lure players into spending. It reads, players using this shield are 50% more likely to defeat boss X. Players using this armor reduce damage taken by an average of 100 points while battling boss X, etc. And what's particularly disconcerting about the patent is that it is on a platform-wide level. Usually games implement microtransactions on a game-by-game basis, but with this system, if it were to be implemented, it's something that any game developer could take advantage of, which might further encourage developers to engage in these types of microtransactions, because the process of doing so might become a lot easier, or at least that's the idea. Again, we have not seen this patent being realized. We have not seen this come to life in any way, shape, or form. What makes me hopeful is that we have seen kind of weird and bizarre and egregious patents in the past that have not instantiated in any way, shape, or form. So back in 2012, it was discovered that Sony patented this advertising sort of technology that would make advertising more interactive while playing video games. So you can see in this image that while the player is playing a game, a McDonald's ad pops up, and then the PlayStation prompts the player to say McDonald's to end the commercial. So you see the player rising from their couch, kind of yelling McDonald's, and then the ad ends and they go back to playing. This is a patent from 2012, and obviously we have not seen this sort of come to life in any way, thank goodness. So yeah, stuff like this, weird, bizarre things like this exist. And while it does highlight the kind of trains of thoughts that higher-ups might be having, it doesn't necessarily mean that this is a done deal. So hopefully this microtransactions patent that exploits a hint system with an AI that sort of guides players to microtransactions purchases is more along the lines of this advertising patent that never really went anywhere. On the other hand, keep in mind that microtransactions have proven to be quite lucrative for Sony. So here's an article from Push Square noting how in 2009, PlayStation Network earned $12.48 billion, and 9.28 billion of that was through sales of full games, add-ons, and microtransactions. And the fact that a patent like this exists goes to show that Sony's at the very least thinking about this stuff. I'd be on the lookout, but not deem this to be the end of the world like it's a done deal, because we have seen so many other patents in the past that looked super shady but never actually ended up being implemented. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't concerned though, especially with PlayStation 5 looming on the horizon and with the patent coming so close to that. But then again, Sony has been one of the better companies when it comes to ensuring that developers have all the creative freedom without mandating microtransactions in games where they don't belong. That's how we got games like Last of Us, Days Gone, God of War, Death Stranding, you name it. So hopefully that's the path they're going to stay on, and hopefully this patent is just some executive's wet dream rather than a reality. So that's one man's take on this whole situation. Let me know in the comments below what you think the likelihood is that Sony will implement something like this. And to be further updated on all things gaming news, reviews, and discussions, stay tuned right here on Young Yeah. I'll see you guys next time. Young out.